Hello everyone, we're almost halfway through 2024, and so you know what this means. It's time to talk about what I consider to be the best albums out of the year so far. 2024 has been quite an interesting year for music in my opinion, and I don't want to really waste any more time. Here are the 25 albums that I've liked the most out of 2024 so far, in no particular order. Let's get the obvious one out of the way with the brand new album of consumer electronics, Surge. I already made an entire video about this album and why I consider this to be one of the most essential releases of 2024, especially when it comes to power electronics, so go and check this out if you haven't already. Next up, let's talk about the cultural phenomenon that is brought by Charli XCX, my most hyped and anticipated album out of the year. I personally don't find this to be her greatest accomplishment, although it has become a bit of a grower on me in certain parts from the first time I heard it, and it does contain some of the best tracks Charli has done in my opinion, such as Von Dutch and B2B. It's another album that has its inconsistencies in my opinion, and tracks that I don't care for at all, but it's still arguably one of the most significant pop albums in recent memory, with infectious party anthems and glorious production. Up next is an album that has the potential to become my album of the year, and that is the comeback album from Son of Nothing called Maze, a Greek post-black metal band who returned 40 years after the release of their previous album, The Guilt of Feeling Alive, which was astonishing, and I thought there is no way they're actually going to top this, but it's pretty close, I'd say. Beyond impressed with the compositions, the very solid structures, the dissonant production, but the highlight has to be the vocals. Those screams sound more fierce and powerful than ever before. I saw them perform this album live and it was a blast. Spectacular stuff right here. One of the most pleasant surprises of the year for me was Yeats 2093. Never really liked Yeats' music that much outside of a few notable tracks, but just like a lot of rap albums under this new trend of rage, they might have a few highlights and the rest is just slop. And Yeats' music, from everything I heard before, was not really an exception. But 2093 is a significant step up, a lot of experimentation with futuristic instrumentals, and it's not even an exaggeration to call this industrial hip hop. Once again, the album is bloated and not everything over here slaps, but it's more consistent compared to anything else he's done so far. The bad shit insanity of Sit and Shine continues with the release of Rum and Coke. The best album out of everything they've put out so far this year, Rum and Coke goes into the directions of heavily compressed and extremely distorted noise rock that has been the case for most stuff they've put out of the label Riot Season. Possibly the closest they've been to sound as unhinged and wacky as Teardrops, one of my personal favorite Sit and Shine albums. Absolutely bizarre and unserious, this album showcases one of the greatest approaches they take with their music, unapologetically raw noise experimental rock, and it's great. Sutcliffe No More, the new breed of Sutcliffe Jugend and Slaves No More, has been consistently dropping so many releases in a quite short period of time, and the results still remain great, with the power electronics and death industrial mayhem that is cute, with a highlight being the massive 24-minute self-titled track, which takes the same approaches of the track Shame, one of the most depressing and hopeless drone and death industrial tracks to ever exist, and makes for another spectacular, vicious trip to the darkest depths of human psyche. Spoken word, vulgar lyrics, and furious screams are still present to this adventurous album, which can be inconsistent at times, but its highlights are something else. Now let's talk about one of the most refreshing and unique albums out of the year. Crazy Dazeo's Accelero is not your casual Brazilian funk album, it's a more abstract and varied approach with industrial, Afro-Brazilian percussion, deconstructed club, and so many more stuff. It's a mess, but it works so well. On top of that, it's a more mature approach with political themes, so there's a lot to unpack with this release, putting a new light to the massively growing Brazilian funk genre. Next up is the new album of Like Witch, who has in recent years made some of the best sounding noise releases that I've ever heard. Self-Sabotage is not necessarily groundbreaking or some of the best stuff he's put out, but the unforgiving and alienating aura of the industrial sounds that he uses still make for some heavy and powerful results, packed in a short 30-minute project. The newest addition for the list is the new album of Ozeram, Cut Paper Flowers. This new direction out of the latest releases of Ozeram has been a blast. Gorgeous minimal drone with sine waves, dark ambience reminiscent of Nurse with Wounds soliloquy for Lilith, and the ideas over here in particular are very beautiful, especially the first two tracks. Great use of minimalism with captivating melodies and an absolute recommendation for anyone who's looking for a dark and soothing experience. Next is the brand new album of Justice, Hyperdrama. After a rocky road since their successful debut, it seems that the French duo is back on track with a varied and eclectic album filled with catchy tunes that range from French electro to synthwave, with the most notable moments being the tracks Generator and Explorer. Very fun listen, nothing exceptional per se, but pretty decent for what it is. Getting to a more extreme and intense approach on electronic music, the new album of Vent, When Stars Collide, is an absolute beast in sound and dynamics. Released on Instruments of Discipline, a great label for discovering intense industrial techno, and this is a great power noise album with futuristic mechanical sounds, hardcore breaks, and a lot of distortion. The second half might not have the same impact, but overall it's a very solid short album for anyone who wants to hear some dark and sick beats. And since we're in the subject of power noise, here are the pioneers Splendor Geometrico, still going strong after decades with their brand new album Strepitus Rhythmicus. It's actually kinda impressive how creative this album is, with the sound choices, the sampling, the industrial sounds and the aesthetics, a sound that is familiar but still manages to amaze with how it's handled. If you already like early stuff out of Splendor Geometrico, this is a no-brainer, they still got it. Next up is Hard Copy by VR Sex, a project that I was familiar for a long time from back in their debut, but never gave them a shot. And listening to their third album, I was pleasantly surprised. Very good post-punk and gothic rock with heavy guitars, raw noisy tracks, and nothing necessarily amazing, but pretty straightforward and on point. There is a nice flow throughout, even with the more interlude parts, and considering that one of the members is a frontman of Drab Majesty, I say that I honestly much prefer this direction from him. Hard Copy has grown on me ever since, and it's a case of an album that is more than serviceable without having the need to reinvent the wheel or anything. Here's an album that I didn't expect to like as much as I did. This is Adrian Lenker's Bright Future, and there was so much praise for this album instantly. I'm usually not that much into folk and singer-songwriter stuff, but this is certainly one of the most standout albums I've heard recently in this style. Very beautiful instrumentation, lyrics that go from bittersweet to absolutely soul-crushing, and yeah, a really pleasant surprise for me. Very nice and emotional album. Flag Day Recordings is a great label to discover some wild experimental stuff, and Clipping Wigs of Grief piqued my curiosity. And wow, this is a hell of an album. Very dense harsh noise, heavily detailed and textured, and some awesome field recordings parts, especially on the third track, whose progression is really solid. One of my strongest recommendations when it comes to experimental noise releases out of 2024. Departure Chandelier, after a very successful debut, returned with their second album, Satan's Soldier of Fortune. Pure and raw black metal, a sound that seems to take great influence from Burzum's Philosophem. It's noisy, it's sloppy, and most importantly, it's vile. And even bigger emphasis on the synths this time, which is fine because it's one of my favorite aspects in their music. So in terms of black metal with awesome riffs and melodies, this is the one for me. On the other hand, if we want to go into a more wacky and avant-garde direction of black metal, we don't have to look any further than Paramenomeni by Oplitis. This mysterious one-man band Chinese project had a roll the previous year, dropping 3 albums back to back, with none of them impressing me that much outside of crazy structures. But the 4th album over here is a vast improvement over anything else so far. More varied in its instrumentation with inclusions of Greek folk, horn parts, better production, more organic sound on drums, and the ideas over here are insane. Crazy to come up with all this, nice technical parts, relentless from start to finish, and it's definitely an experience to say the least. And going back to some more raw and lo-fi black metal stuff, from an actual Greek black metal band this time, Mnemas Kataramena Lepsana is possibly the best thing I've heard from them. Their catalog has been really inconsistent after so many releases in such a short period of time, but the riffs over here are awesome, and the type of noise and rough production is not to the point where it becomes irritating. This is a fierce and unhinged black metal release, really satisfied with how this sounds. Black Eye by Cyclops is an electro house release that in my opinion deserves more attention. Minimal beats, tribal percussion, bizarre samples, and incredibly production. Pretty similar sound with her previous albums, which I do recommend, and this is yet another really solid work. When it comes to an electronic release deserving of all the praise, that goes to Title Memory EXO by Igloo Ghost. I always found Igloo Ghost to be an excellent producer, it's just that his works would be all over the place, and anytime he would introduce an awesome idea, it would immediately jump to something else, not leaving any of his ideas room to shine. This is by far his most consistent work so far, with certain aspects and deliveries being recurring themes as the album goes on. The structures feel more balanced, and also this more mechanical and darker type of sound we get with this album is a very pleasant surprise. It works really well, and this is undoubtedly one of the best sounding albums of this year, without a doubt the best album he's put out by far. Next up is the new album from Gnod, Spotland. I was familiar with some of their stuff in the past, and I just thought of them as a decent psychedelic rock drone project, but I'm beyond impressed with how good this album is. I got into this expecting it's going to be another typical Gnod release, but this is certainly some of the most captivating and hypnotic releases I've heard in a while. Minimal, straight to the point, consistently gorgeous, spacey, and the thing is, this is probably just going to pass like just another release in the genre. But for me, Spotland in particular feels special, and coming from a type of sound I'm not that much into, this is mind-blowing. Speaking of albums that exceeded my expectations, I'd say that Umbilical by Thou is the best thing they've ever done. After a series of albums repeats that I didn't care for at all, I got into this with no expectations, but this is actually a really well made sludge and doom metal album, possibly their least monotonous and repetitive work so far. Its little twists with more fast paced tracks are enough to keep you constantly engaged, with Umbilical not feeling like it's overstaying its welcome. Really glad that I ended up liking a Thou album as much as I did. Next up is the new dark and haunting modern classical release of Catherine Greindort's Songs for the Dead, with themes from Greek to Pit mythology and poetic deliveries by the singer of And Also the Trees. Songs from the Dead is filled with lush instrumentation that varies from track to track. It is constantly engaging, and it makes for one of the most intriguing and creative releases to come out of this year, which certainly deserves more attention. Next up is the new Geotic album, The Anchorite, which is completely different compared to anything else I've heard from him. He would usually do some chill micro house albums, but The Anchorite is a very interesting approach of ambient music with minimal lo-fi folk and post-rock elements, constantly looping themselves and creating this soothing and ethereal atmosphere from start to finish. It is definitely the most standout album I've heard from him so far, and another surprise in terms of effectiveness with this approach and sound. And finally, I'm gonna include in my top albums of 2024 so far the new Chelsea Wolfe album, She Reaches Out to Sea, a return to form in the more darkwave sounds but with a post-industrial twist. There is something refreshing about it, at least for Chelsea Wolfe standards, and some of the beats over here sound crazy good. Might not really hold its momentum from start to finish, but it's really enjoyable for the most part. And those are my picks for the best albums out of 2024 so far. Let me know yours down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.